I thought I was being the perfect mother when I signed over our family home to my son Miguel. Instead, I found myself locked out of my own kitchen, sleeping on a cot in the garage like some unwanted stranger. My name is May Rodriguez, and this is how I discovered that sometimes the greatest acts of love can become the most devastating mistakes of your life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning I woke up to find a padlock on what used to be my bedroom door, I knew my life had taken a turn I never could have imagined. But let me start from the beginning, because the story of how I ended up sleeping in my own garage starts 3 years earlier, on a sunny Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona, when I made what I thought was the most generous decision of my life. I was 62 years old, recently widowed after losing my husband Carlos to a sudden heart attack, and sitting in the living room of the house we'd built together 40 years ago. The mortgage had been paid off for 15 years, and the 4-bedroom adobe-style home with its red tile roof and desert garden had become my sanctuary. Every corner held memories of raising Miguel, our only child. Every wall told the story of birthday parties, and Christmas mornings, and quiet family dinners around the kitchen table Carlos had crafted with his own hands. Miguel had been struggling financially ever since his new wife Brittany had their first baby. At 28, he was working 2 jobs trying to support his growing family while living in a cramped apartment across town. I'd watch him during our Sunday dinners, seeing the stress lines forming around his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was looking. As a mother, watching your child struggle feels like drowning while standing on dry land. The house felt enormous and empty without Carlos. 4 bedrooms for one person seemed almost wasteful, especially when I knew my son was sleeping on a pull-out couch while his pregnant wife tried to rest in their tiny bedroom with a crying infant. That's when the idea formed, slowly at first, then with the kind of certainty that only comes when you think you're doing something purely good. I called Miguel that Tuesday evening, my hands shaking slightly as I dialed his number. When he answered, I could hear baby Sophia crying in the background, and Brittany's frustrated voice asking if the formula was ready yet. Mijo, I said, using the Spanish endearment that had been his name before Miguel, before the world knew him as anything other than my little boy. I've been thinking about something important, and I want you to come over tomorrow so we can talk. Mom, is everything okay? You sound serious. There was concern in his voice, the same tone he'd used as a child when he thought he might be in trouble. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Actually, everything's about to be better than fine. Just come by after work tomorrow, and bring Brittany and the baby. I want to talk to all of you together. The next evening, I watched Miguel's beat-up Honda pull into the driveway. The same driveway where I'd taught him to ride his bicycle, where Carlos had shown him how to change a tire, where we'd taken countless family photos over the years. Miguel got out first, then carefully helped Brittany emerge with baby Sophia bundled in her arms. I noticed how Brittany's face looked tired, strained in a way that motherhood sometimes demands, especially when you're barely scraping by financially. I had prepared their favorite meal, carne asada, with fresh tortillas, and the rice and beans recipe my mother had taught me decades ago. As we sat around Carlos's handmade table, I looked at this little family struggling to make ends meet, and felt my heart expand with love and determination. I've made a decision, I announced after we'd finished eating, after baby Sophia had fallen asleep in Miguel's arms, after Brittany had complimented the meal and insisted on helping with the dishes despite my protests. I want to give you the house. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the same clock that had marked time for our family for 30 years. What do you mean, give us the house? Miguel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I mean, I want to transfer ownership to you and Brittany. No mortgage, no payments, no strings attached. This house has been in our family for 4 decades, and I want it to stay in our family. You need space for your growing family, and I need to know that Sophia and any future grandchildren will grow up somewhere stable and secure. Brittany's eyes had filled with tears. May, that's incredible, but we can't accept something so enormous. This is your home. No, I said firmly, reaching across the table to cover her hand with mine. This was Carlos's and my home. Now it's going to be your home. I've already spoken to a lawyer about the paperwork. All you have to do is say yes. Miguel was staring at me like I just offered him the moon. Mom, are you sure about this? Where would you live? I had thought about this part carefully. There's a lovely senior community about 20 minutes from here, Las Flores Retirement Village. It's got activities, other people my age, a community center with classes and social events. I think it might be exactly what I need at this stage of my life. After losing your father, this house has felt more like a museum than a home. Too many memories, too many empty rooms. It wasn't entirely true. The house didn't feel like a museum to me at all. It felt like sanctuary, like the physical manifestation of everything Carlos and I had built together. But watching Miguel's face light up with hope, seeing Brittany calculate in her head all the things this gift would mean for their family, I knew I was making the right decision. We would pay you back, Miguel said quickly. Not right away, but eventually. When my business takes off, when things stabilize. Absolutely not, I replied. This is a gift, not a loan. The only thing I ask is that you take care of the house, love it the way your father and I loved it, and maybe let your old mother visit from time to time to see how you're settling in. That night, after they'd left with promises to think about it and discuss it together, I walked through every room of the house, touching walls Carlos had painted, running my fingers along windowsills he'd installed, remembering the life we'd created within these walls. Part of me wondered if I was making a mistake, but the larger part of me felt proud, generous, like I was finally doing something meaningful with the wealth Carlos and I had accumulated over our lifetime. Miguel called me the next morning, his voice thick with emotion. Mom, if you're really sure about this, Brittany and I would be honored to accept your gift. We promised to take care of everything, to maintain the house exactly the way Dad would have wanted. The legal process took 6 weeks. I met with my attorney, Harold Vance, a kind man who'd handled Carlos's will and understood my situation. Harold was thorough in explaining exactly what transferring the property would mean. May, he said during one of our meetings, once you sign these papers, the house legally belongs to Miguel and Brittany. You'll have no legal claim to the property. Are you certain this is what you want? Harold, I'm giving my son a home where he can raise his family. Of course I'm certain. I'm not questioning your generosity, Harold said gently. I'm just making sure you understand all the implications. Have you considered keeping a life estate in the property? That would allow you to continue living there while still transferring ownership to Miguel. I shook my head. That would defeat the purpose. I want them to have complete ownership, complete freedom to make the house their own. Besides, I'm excited about moving to Las Flores. It'll be a new adventure. Looking back now, I realize Harold was trying to protect me in ways I was too naive to understand. But at the time, his caution felt like doubt in my son's character, doubt in the strength of our family bond. I was so focused on being the generous mother, the selfless woman who put her child's needs above her own, that I couldn't imagine any scenario where this decision would become anything other than a beautiful family legacy. The day we signed the papers, Miguel hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. I love you, Mom. I promise you'll never regret this. You're giving us everything we've ever dreamed of. Brittany was crying as she signed her name on the deed transfer documents. May, I don't know how we'll ever thank you for this. You're not just giving us a house. You're giving us a future. I moved to Las Flores Retirement Village 6 weeks later, on a crisp morning in October, when the desert air was finally cooling from the brutal Phoenix summer. Miguel and Brittany insisted on handling the entire move, hiring professional movers, packing my belongings with careful attention to my most precious items. Brittany had even created a photo album of the house, documenting every room so I'd have memories to keep with me. My new apartment at Las Flores was lovely, a one-bedroom unit with a small patio overlooking the community's central courtyard. The walls were freshly painted, the appliances were modern, and the view included palm trees and a fountain that created a peaceful soundtrack for my morning coffee. The community offered yoga classes, book clubs, game nights, and weekly social events designed to help residents build friendships and stay active. For the first few months, the arrangement felt perfect. Miguel would call me twice a week with updates on how they were settling into the house. Brittany had painted the nursery a soft yellow color and installed new shelving for Sophia's growing collection of toys. Miguel had started a small vegetable garden in the backyard, following the same layout Carlos had used for decades. They sent me photos of family dinners around Carlos's table, of Sofia taking her first steps across the living room where Miguel had taken his first steps 28 years earlier. During my visits, which happened every few weeks, I felt the warm satisfaction of seeing the house filled with young energy again. Sofia's laughter echoed through rooms that had been quiet for too long. Brittany had a gift for decorating, adding touches that honored the house's original character, while making it fresh and contemporary. Miguel had fixed the perpetually dripping faucet in the guest bathroom and replaced the old ceiling fans with more energy-efficient models. "You're amazing for doing this, Mom," Miguel would say every time I visited, usually while we sat on the back patio watching Sofia chase butterflies in the garden. "This house is perfect for raising a family."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Sofia's gonna have the childhood I had, running around in a real backyard, having her own room, space to grow. I would nod and smile, feeling the deep contentment that comes from knowing you've made the right decision. The house looked happy again, if such a thing were possible. It looked alive and purposeful in a way it hadn't since Carlos's death. My life at Las Flores was pleasant enough. I made friends with my neighbor Dorothy, a retired teacher from Michigan, who shared my love of crossword puzzles and old movies. I joined the book club and the gardening committee. Twice a week, I attended water aerobics classes at the community pool. It was a gentle, predictable routine that kept me busy and socially engaged. But I missed the house more than I'd expected. I missed the way the morning light streamed through the kitchen window, creating patterns on the floor that changed with the seasons. I missed Carlos's workshop in the garage, where his tools still hung in the precise order he'd maintained for 40 years. I missed the desert garden we'd cultivated together, where barrel cacti and palo verde trees created a landscape that was uniquely ours. Still, when moments of regret would surface, I'd remind myself of Miguel's happiness, of Sofia's laughter-filling rooms that had grown too quiet, of Brittany's genuine gratitude every time she saw me. This was what love looked like, I told myself. This was how a mother supports her child's growing family. The first sign that something was changing came about 8 months after the transfer, during one of my regular Sunday visits. I had called Miguel on Saturday evening to confirm our usual dinner plans, but when I called, Brittany answered the phone with an edge in her voice I hadn't heard before. "Oh, May, about tomorrow," Brittany said, not bothering with her usual warm greeting. "We're not going to be able to do dinner. Miguel's got some work project he needs to finish, and I'm not feeling well. Maybe we can reschedule for next weekend." It was the first time since I'd given them the house that our Sunday tradition had been canceled. I felt a small pang of disappointment, but I understood that young families have unpredictable schedules, especially with a toddler and Miguel's demanding work schedule. "Of course, sweetheart," I said. "Is there anything I can do to help? I could bring over some of my chicken soup if you're feeling under the weather." "No, that's okay. We're fine. We just need some family time, you know?" The phrase family time stuck with me. Since when was I not included in their family time? But I pushed the thought away, reminding myself not to be overly sensitive. They were young parents establishing their own routines and traditions. It was natural for them to want some weekends to themselves. 2 weeks later, the same thing happened. Then again the following weekend. My regular Sunday visits, which had been a cherished part of all our routines, suddenly became irregular and subject to last-minute cancellations. When I did visit, Brittany seemed distracted, often busy with tasks that kept her from sitting down to chat. Miguel seemed stressed about work and less attentive than usual. "Is everything okay with you two?" I asked Miguel during one of our phone conversations. "You both seem overwhelmed lately." "Everything's fine, Mom. Just the usual stuff. Work, baby. Trying to keep up with everything. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was because they'd stopped including me in their daily lives the way they had in the beginning. The photo updates stopped coming. The calls became shorter and less frequent. When I suggested visiting, there always seemed to be a reason why it wasn't a good time. 3 months later, Brittany announced she was pregnant again. I should have been overjoyed, and part of me was, but the announcement came during a hurried phone call where she mentioned it almost as an afterthought while explaining why they couldn't accommodate my visit that weekend. "We're going to need to use the guest room as a nursery," she said matter-of-factly. "So if you want to visit overnight, you'll need to give us more advance notice so we can figure out the sleeping arrangements." The guest room had been my old sewing room, the place where I'd spent countless hours creating Halloween costumes for Miguel's school pageants, altering Carlos's work clothes, making curtains for every window in the house. Now it was going to be converted for their second child, which was wonderful, but the way Brittany discussed it made me feel like an inconvenience rather than a welcome family member. I began to notice other small changes during my increasingly infrequent visits. My mother's china, which had been displayed in the dining room cabinet when they first moved in, had been replaced with Brittany's more modern dishes. The family photos that had lined the hallway, chronicling Miguel's childhood and our family history, had been taken down and replaced with pictures of Brittany's family and more recent photos of their new life together. Carlos's workshop in the garage had been cleared out, his carefully organized tools packed away somewhere I couldn't see. When I asked Miguel about it, he said they needed the space for storage, and that he'd moved Dad's tools to a shed he'd built in the backyard. "I wanted to ask you before I cleared it out," he said, "but you've been so busy with your activities at Las Flores, I didn't want to bother you with details like that." But he hadn't asked me, and I wasn't too busy to care about preserving Carlos's workspace, the place where he'd taught Miguel how to use a hammer, how to measure twice and cut once, how to take pride in working with his hands. Each small change felt insignificant on its own, but together they created a pattern that made me increasingly uncomfortable. The house I'd given them out of love was being systematically stripped of the history that had made it our home. It was becoming their house, which was natural and expected, but somehow the process felt less like renovation and more like erasure. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in March, almost exactly a year after I'd signed over the property. I had been feeling unwell, a persistent cold that had developed into something more concerning. Dorothy from next door had driven me to an urgent care appointment, where the doctor had diagnosed me with pneumonia and prescribed bed rest and antibiotics. I called Miguel from the doctor's office, my voice hoarse and weak. "Mijo, I'm not feeling well. The doctor says I have pneumonia and I shouldn't be alone for the next few days. Could I possibly stay with you and Brittany until I'm feeling stronger?" There was a pause that lasted too long, filled with muffled conversation as Miguel apparently consulted with Brittany in the background. "Mom, this really isn't a good time. Brittany's pregnancy has been difficult, and Sophia's been sick too. We can't risk exposing everyone to your pneumonia. Why don't you call that nice lady from your retirement place? Doesn't she have family who could help you out?" I was sitting in my car in the urgent care parking lot, rain pattering against the windshield, feeling sicker than I'd felt in years, and my son was suggesting I ask a neighbor to take care of me instead of coming to the house I'd given him. "Miguel, I'm not asking for nursing care. I just need a place to rest where I won't be completely alone if something happens. I could stay in the guest room and keep to myself. The guest room is full of baby stuff now, remember? There's really nowhere for you to stay comfortably. Nowhere for me to stay comfortably in the 4-bedroom house I'd lived in for 40 years, the house I'd given them so they'd have space for their growing family. What about the couch?" I asked, hearing the desperation in my own voice and hating how it sounded. "Mom, I really think you'd be more comfortable at your own place. If you need anything, we can bring it to you." But with Brittany feeling so poorly and Sophia's schedule, having another person in the house right now would just be too much stress. I hung up the phone and sat in my car for 20 minutes, rain streaming down the windows, trying to process what had just happened. My son, the little boy I'd raised in that house, the young man I'd given everything to, had just told me there was no room for me in my own former home when I was sick and scared and needed family support. Dorothy did take care of me, bringing me soup and checking on me twice a day until my pneumonia cleared. She never once made me feel like a burden or an inconvenience. During those fevering days in my apartment at Las Flores, I had plenty of time to think about how my generous gift had somehow transformed into my exclusion from the family I'd been trying to support. When I finally felt well enough to call Miguel again, his voice was cheerful and casual, as if our previous conversation had never happened. "Mom, you sound so much better. How are you feeling?" "I'm better, thank you. Miguel, I've been thinking about our conversation when I was sick, and I feel like we need to talk about some things." "What kind of things?" "About my place in your family now that you're living in the house." about how our relationship has changed since I transferred the property. There was another pause, shorter this time, but still noticeable. Mom, nothing's changed. We love you just as much as we ever did. We're just busy with our own lives now, you know? That's normal when people grow up and start their own families. But it didn't feel normal to me. It felt like I traded my home for the privilege of being an occasional visitor in my son's life. Like I'd purchased their independence at the cost of my own belonging. That conversation planted a seed of doubt that grew stronger every day. I began to question not just the wisdom of my decision, but the nature of the relationship I thought I had with Miguel and Brittany. Had their gratitude been genuine, or had it been the kind of politeness people show when someone gives them something valuable? Had I been naive to think that giving them the house would bring us closer together rather than create distance? The answers to those questions would come sooner than I expected, and they would be more devastating than anything I could have imagined. The answers came on a scorching July morning when I decided to surprise Miguel and Brittany with fresh tamales I'd made the night before. It was Sophia's second birthday, and despite not receiving an invitation to any celebration, I wanted to drop off a gift and some of her favorite food. I'd spent hours the previous evening preparing the masa, filling each tamale with the pork and green chile recipe that had been passed down through 3 generations of Rodriguez women. I arrived at the house around 10 in the morning, expecting to find the family enjoying a leisurely weekend breakfast. Instead, I found the driveway filled with cars I didn't recognize, and the sound of children's laughter echoing from the backyard. Through the side gate that Carlos had installed to access our garden, I could see colorful balloons tied to the patio chairs and a small bounce house set up on the lawn where I used to grow vegetables. They were having Sophia's birthday party without me. Not only hadn't I been invited, but from the looks of the elaborate setup, this had been planned for weeks. I stood at that side gate, holding a container of homemade tamales, watching my granddaughter play with children I'd never met, while Brittany chatted with women who were clearly her friends, her real family, the people who actually mattered in her life. Miguel emerged from the kitchen carrying a birthday cake shaped like a butterfly, Sophia's current obsession. He was smiling and laughing, looking happier and more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. This was the life he'd built in the house I'd given him, a life that apparently had no space for the woman who'd made it all possible. I watched for several minutes, trying to process the magnitude of my exclusion. These weren't just neighbors who'd dropped by unexpectedly. This was an organized celebration with decorations, planned activities, and what looked like at least 20 guests. Every detail had been carefully arranged, every invitation deliberately sent, and somehow my name had never made it onto any list. Sophia spotted me through the fence and came running over with the pure joy that only a 2-year-old can express. Abuela Mai, she called, using the Spanish grandmother name I'd taught her during our visits. Her excited voice caught Miguel's attention. I watched his face transform from surprise to something that looked disturbingly like annoyance as he realized I was there. He set down the cake and walked over to the fence where Sophia was trying to climb up to reach me. "Mom," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "What are you doing here?" "I brought tamales for Sophia's birthday," I said, lifting the container. "And I have a present for her in the car." Miguel glanced back at the party, where several guests had noticed our conversation and were watching with obvious curiosity. "This isn't really a good time. We're in the middle of the party." "I can see that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I was hoping I could wish Sophia a happy birthday and maybe stay for a few minutes. "Mom, you should have called first. We didn't plan for extra people." Extra people? I was extra people at my granddaughter's birthday party in the house I'd given them. Brittany had noticed the commotion and was walking toward us, her expression unreadable. When she reached the fence, she smiled, but it was the kind of smile people use when they're trying to manage an awkward situation in front of an audience. "May, what a surprise," she said. "We weren't expecting you." "I brought tamales for Sophia," I repeated, feeling increasingly foolish for thinking a spontaneous visit from a grandmother would be welcome. "That's sweet, but we already have all the food prepared for the party. And we're trying to keep the group small, just close friends and family." Close friends and family. I looked at the strangers laughing and playing in my former backyard and wondered when I'd stopped qualifying as family. "Could I at least give Sophia her present?" I asked. Brittany glanced at Miguel. some kind of silent communication passing between them. Maybe you could come by tomorrow instead? When we're not so busy with everything. Please, Mammy, Sophia said, still reaching for me through the fence slats. I want to see Abuela May. Sophia, go play with your friends, Brittany said firmly. Abuela May has to go now. I watched my granddaughter's face fall as she was dismissed, watched her walk slowly back toward the party with the confused disappointment that children feel when adult behavior doesn't make sense. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't just about scheduling conflicts or party planning logistics. This was about my place in their lives, or rather, my lack of one. I drove back to Las Flores with the tamales still warm in their container, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. The woman at the front desk, Maria, noticed my distress when I walked through the lobby. Mrs. Rodriguez, are you feeling all right? You look upset. I'm fine, I lied, then immediately reconsidered. Actually, no, I'm not fine. My family just excluded me from my granddaughter's birthday party. Maria's face softened with understanding. Would you like to sit down and talk about it? Sometimes it helps to say these things out loud. I found myself telling Maria the entire story, from the generous gift of the house to the gradual exclusion, to this morning's devastating revelation that I'd become persona non grata in my own family. As I spoke, I realized how naive I'd been to think that giving them the house would strengthen our bond rather than give them the freedom to cut me out of their lives entirely. Mrs. Rodriguez, Maria said gently, I've worked here for 15 years, and I've seen this pattern before. Sometimes when adult children receive large financial gifts from their parents, especially property, it changes the dynamic of the relationship in ways nobody expects. What do you mean? Well, think about it from their perspective. They're young and trying to establish their independence, their own family identity. Having the person who gave them everything still actively involved in their lives might feel like they can't fully own their success or their space. Some people handle that guilt by creating distance. I hadn't considered the possibility that my presence made them feel guilty or dependent. But even if that were true, the solution seemed cruel and unnecessary. They could have talked to me about boundaries, about their need for space. They didn't have to systematically exclude me from family celebrations and milestones. That evening, I called my older sister Carmen, who lived in Tucson with her husband Roberto. Carmen had always been more practical and less sentimental than me, qualities that had sometimes annoyed me but which I now desperately needed. Carmen, I think I made a terrible mistake giving Miguel the house. I told her about the birthday party, about the growing distance, about feeling like a stranger in my own family. Carmen listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or disapproval. May, she said when I finished, I have to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. When you gave them the house, did you have any expectations about how they would treat you afterward? I expected them to still love me, I said, hearing how pathetic it sounded even as I said it. But beyond that, did you expect to have unlimited access to the house? Did you expect to be included in all their decisions about it? Did you expect your relationship to stay exactly the same? I thought about her questions seriously. I expected to still feel like part of the family. And what does that look like to you specifically? I expected to be invited to my granddaughter's birthday party, I said, my voice breaking. I expected to not be treated like an unwelcome stranger when I want to visit my son. Carmen was quiet for a moment. May, you gave away your home. You literally signed papers transferring ownership of the place where you'd lived for 40 years to someone else. Did you really think everything else would stay the same? Her words stung because they contained an uncomfortable truth. I had given away my home, but somehow I'd expected to retain all the emotional benefits of ownership. I'd wanted them to have the house, but to still treat it like it was mine whenever it was convenient for me. So you think I'm being unreasonable? I think you're being human, Carmen said. But I also think you need to face reality. That house belongs to them now, completely and legally. They don't owe you access to it, and they don't owe you inclusion in their family events just because you gave them a generous gift. But I'm Sophia's grandmother. I'm Miguel's mother. Yes, you are. But those relationships exist independently of property ownership. If they're not treating you well, it's not because of the house situation. It's because they're not good people, or because there are other issues you haven't recognized. Carmen's perspective was harsh, but probably accurate. I'd conflated property ownership with family connection, as if giving them the house would somehow guarantee my place in their lives forever. Instead, I'd given them the ultimate gift of independence from me. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of clarity. If Miguel and Brittany wanted to exclude me from their lives, that was their choice. But I deserved to understand why, and I deserved to be treated with basic respect and honesty. I decided to call Miguel and request a serious conversation about our relationship. Miguel, I want to come over this evening so we can talk about what happened yesterday, and about how our relationship has changed since I gave you the house. Mom, I don't think yesterday was a big deal. You just caught us at a bad time. It was Sophia's birthday party with 20 guests, Miguel. That wasn't a bad time. That was a deliberate choice not to include me. I want to understand why. Another pause. I was learning to dread these pauses, the moments when Miguel consulted with Brittany before responding to his own mother. Fine. Come over around 7. But we can't talk long because Brittany needs to rest early. That evening, I drove to the house with a mixture of determination and dread. I'd spent the day thinking about what I wanted to say, how I could express my hurt without sounding demanding or manipulative. I wanted answers, but I also wanted to preserve whatever relationship was salvageable. Miguel met me at the front door instead of inviting me in, which immediately set an unwelcome tone for our conversation. He looked tired and stressed, older somehow than he had just a few months earlier. Mom, before you say anything, I want you to understand that Brittany and I appreciate everything you've done for us. The house has been incredible for our family. But, I prompted, sensing there was more. But we feel like you haven't really let go of it. Like you still think of it as your house that we're just borrowing. I was genuinely confused. What do you mean? I signed over the deed. I moved out completely. How have I not let go? You show up unannounced. You ask about changes we've made like you need to approve them. Yesterday you seemed angry that we didn't invite you to Sophia's party, like you had some automatic right to be there. I thought grandmothers were automatically invited to their grandchildren's birthday parties, I said. And I don't show up unannounced that often. Mom, you do. And every time you come over, you look around like you're inspecting the place, like you're judging how we're taking care of your house. This accusation stung because there might have been some truth to it. I did notice changes, and I probably did react to them in ways that made Miguel and Brittany feel defensive. But my interest came from love for the house and concern for its maintenance, not from judgment of their choices. Miguel, I gave you this house because I love you, and because I wanted your family to have security and space to grow. If I notice changes, it's because I care about the house, not because I'm judging you. But don't you see how that makes us feel? Like we're living in a museum that we're not allowed to change? Like we're being watched and evaluated all the time? I was beginning to understand their perspective, even if I didn't agree with their solution. They felt constrained by my continued interest in the house, burdened by the weight of my generosity, guilty about accepting such an enormous gift. So what do you want from me? I asked. How can we fix this? Miguel looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, like he used to do as a child when he had to admit he'd done something wrong. We think it would be better if you gave us some space for a while. Let us really settle into being homeowners without feeling like we're being supervised. How much space? What does that look like? Maybe you could call before visiting instead of just dropping by. And maybe we could see each other less frequently, like once a month instead of every week. Once a month. I was being asked to see my son and granddaughter once a month because my presence in the house I'd given them made them uncomfortable. What about holidays? I asked. What about Sophia's milestones and special occasions? We'll figure that out as we go. But for now, we just need some breathing room to be our own family. I stood on the front porch of the house where I'd raised Miguel, looking at my son who was essentially asking me to disappear from his life so he could enjoy the gift I'd given him without the inconvenience of my presence. The irony was almost unbearable. "I understand," I said, though I didn't really understand at all. "I'll give you the space you need." As I drove back to Las Flores that night, I replayed our conversation over and over, trying to identify where I'd gone wrong. Had I been too invested in the house after giving it away? Had I made them feel guilty or constrained by continuing to care about a place that had been my home for 40 years? Maybe I had, but their solution felt like punishment rather than compromise. Instead of talking to me about boundaries or asking me to modify my behavior, they decided to minimize our relationship until my presence was barely noticeable in their lives. I honored their request for space, even though it felt like emotional exile. I stopped calling except for special occasions. I stopped dropping by with food or gifts. I waited for them to contact me, which happened rarely, and usually only when they needed something like babysitting recommendations or advice about home maintenance issues. The loneliness was overwhelming. My life at Las Flores, which had seemed pleasantly busy when I had regular family visits to look forward to, now felt hollow and purposeless. I attended activities and made small talk with other residents, but my heart wasn't in any of it. I'd given away my home and, in the process, had somehow given away my family too. 3 months into this new arrangement, I called Miguel to ask if I could see Sophia for her first day of preschool. It seemed like the kind of milestone that grandmothers should be allowed to celebrate, even grandmothers who were being kept at arm's length. "Mom, her first day is really just for parents," Miguel said. "And honestly, we're trying to establish routines without a lot of extra people around." Extra people again. I was extra people in my granddaughter's life. "I don't want to be there for the drop-off," I clarified. "I just thought maybe I could see her afterward, take some pictures, hear about her first day. Maybe some other time." We're still adjusting to everything. That night, I looked at the framed photos on my nightstand at Las Flores, pictures of Sophia as a baby, of Miguel's high school graduation, of family Christmas mornings in the house that no longer belonged to me. I realized that in trying to secure my family's future, I'd somehow erased myself from it. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, on a Thursday evening when my neighbor Dorothy knocked on my door with a concerned expression. "May, I hate to bother you, but I just got off the phone with my daughter in Phoenix. She was driving through your old neighborhood today and saw a for rent sign in front of your house." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. Miguel and Brittany live there." "That's what I thought too. But Sarah was sure it was the right address. She said she remembered the house from when she helped you move." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I drove to the house for the first time in 2 months, my hands shaking as I turned onto the familiar street. Dorothy's daughter had been right. There was a large for rent sign planted in the front yard of the house I'd lived in for 40 years. The house I'd given to Miguel and Brittany less than 2 years earlier. The driveway was empty. The windows were dark. The small vegetable garden Miguel had started was overgrown with weeds. It looked like nobody had lived there for weeks. I sat in my car, staring at the rental sign, trying to process what I was seeing. Had something happened to Miguel and Brittany? Had they moved somewhere else? Had there been some kind of emergency that forced them to leave? More importantly, if they'd moved out of the house, why hadn't they told me? And why was someone else advertising it for rent instead of returning it to me? I called Miguel's number from my car, my hands trembling as I dialed. "Miguel, I'm sitting in front of the house and there's a for rent sign in the yard. What's going on?" The pause this time was the longest yet. "Mom, I can explain. Where are you living? Are you and Brittany okay? Is Sophia okay?" "We're fine. We moved to a bigger place in Scottsdale last month." "You moved? And you didn't tell me?" "We were going to tell you, but everything happened so fast and we knew you'd be upset." I stared at the house through my windshield, trying to understand what he was saying. "Miguel, if you moved out of the house, why is there a rental sign instead of you returning it to me?" Another pause. "Mom, the house belongs to us now. We can do whatever we want with it." The words hit me like a physical blow. They'd moved to a bigger house in Scottsdale, and were renting out the house I'd given them as an investment property. They were profiting from my generosity while excluding me from their lives. "You're making money off the house I gave you while asking me to stay away from your family?" "It's not like that, Mom. What is it like, Miguel? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you took my house, moved somewhere else, and are now treating my gift like a business opportunity. We needed the rental income to afford the new place. The house you gave us was great, but we wanted something bigger, more modern. This made the most financial sense. I ended the call and sat in my car for an hour, looking at the house where I'd expected my granddaughter to grow up, where I'd imagined Miguel and Brittany building the same kind of family memories Carlos and I had created. Instead, strangers would be living there, paying rent to my son who had excluded me from his life while profiting from my sacrifice. That evening, I called Harold Vance, the attorney who had handled the property transfer. I needed to understand my legal options, if any existed. Harold, if I gave property to my son and he moved out to rent it to strangers, do I have any legal recourse? Harold's sigh was audible through the phone. May, when you transferred the deed, you gave Miguel complete ownership of the property. He has every legal right to rent it, sell it, or do anything else he wants with it, even though I gave it to him specifically for his family to live in? Unless you put specific restrictions in the deed transfer, which we discussed and you declined, he owns it outright. I'm sorry, May, but you have no legal claim to that property anymore. I hung up feeling completely defeated. I'd given away my most valuable asset to people who had used it as a stepping stone to something better while simultaneously pushing me out of their lives. I was legally powerless and emotionally devastated. But as I sat in my Las Flores apartment that night, surrounded by the modest furnishings I'd accumulated since leaving my real home, something inside me began to shift. The hurt and disappointment were still there, but underneath them was growing an anger I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. I'd been naive, yes. I'd been overly generous, probably. But I hadn't deserved to be treated with such calculated coldness by the people I'd sacrificed everything to help. Miguel and Brittany had taken my gift and used it not just financially, but as a weapon to exclude me from their lives. For months, I'd accepted their explanations and excuses, their requests for space, and their complaints about my involvement. I'd convinced myself that I was the problem, that my expectations had been unreasonable, that their distance was my fault for not letting go properly. But looking at the situation clearly, I realized they'd manipulated me from the beginning. They'd accepted my enormous gift with gratitude and promises, then systematically excluded me from their lives while profiting from my generosity. They'd moved to a bigger house using my gift as their financial foundation, and they hadn't even bothered to tell me they were leaving. I was angry, and for the first time in months, that anger felt justified and empowering rather than destructive. I'd been treated badly by people who owed me at least basic respect and honesty. And while I might not have legal recourse, I wasn't completely powerless. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't experienced since the day I'd decided to give them the house. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I knew exactly who I needed to call to make it happen. The call I made that morning would change everything, though I didn't realize it at the time. I dialed the number for my nephew David Rodriguez, Carmen's youngest son, who worked as an investigative journalist for the Phoenix Tribune. David had always been the family member who asked the hard questions, who didn't accept easy answers, who believed that truth was worth pursuing even when it made people uncomfortable. Tia May, David said when he answered, using the Spanish word for aunt that connected us to our shared heritage. This is a surprise. How are you doing? I'm not sure, I answered honestly. David, I need to ask you about something, and I need you to promise me you'll give me an honest answer even if it's not what I want to hear. Of course. What's going on? I told him everything. The house transfer, the gradual exclusion, Miguel and Brittany's move to Scottsdale, the rental property discovery. David listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates and specific incidents. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Tia, what you're describing sounds like financial elder abuse. What do you mean? Financial elder abuse is when someone takes advantage of an older person's trust or generosity for financial gain, often while isolating them from support systems. Your son accepted a property worth hundreds of thousands of dollars from you, then systematically excluded you from his life while using your gift as investment income. That fits the pattern. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. But Miguel is my son. He wouldn't abuse me. Elder abuse often happens within families, May. Adult children are actually the most common perpetrators because they have the most access and trust. The fact that Miguel is your son doesn't make this situation less problematic, it makes it more concerning. David's words forced me to confront a possibility I'd been avoiding. Had Miguel and Brittany planned this from the beginning? Had they accepted my gift knowing they intended to use it as a stepping stone to something better while pushing me out of their lives? David, what should I do? First, you need to document everything. Every conversation, every exclusion, every time they've profited from your gift while denying you access to your family. Second, you need to understand that this isn't your fault. You made a generous decision based on love and trust. They chose to exploit that generosity. But legally, I have no recourse. The house belongs to them now. Legal recourse isn't the only kind of recourse, Tia. Sometimes the most powerful tool is simply exposing the truth. That afternoon, I began documenting everything David had suggested. I wrote down dates and details of every conversation, every canceled visit, every exclusion from family events. I gathered the legal documents from the property transfer, the photos I'd taken of the rental sign, the records of my attempts to maintain contact with Miguel and Brittany, despite their increasing coldness. As I compiled this information, patterns emerged that I hadn't recognized while living through them. Miguel's requests for space had always come right after I'd expressed interest in the house or asked about changes they'd made. Brittany's sudden illnesses or conflicts always seemed to coincide with occasions when I might have expected to be included. Their move to Scottsdale had been planned for months, based on the timeline David helped me reconstruct, yet they'd never mentioned it until after I discovered the rental sign. Most damaging was the realization that they'd been treating the house as investment property almost from the moment they'd taken ownership. David helped me research public records and discovered that Miguel had taken out a home equity loan against the property 6 months after I'd transferred it to him, using the money as a down payment for the Scottsdale house. They'd been leveraging my gift to fund their upgraded lifestyle, while simultaneously arguing that my presence in their lives was too burdensome to tolerate. Tia, David said during one of our follow-up conversations, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What do you want to happen now? What would justice look like to you? I considered his question seriously. I didn't want revenge, exactly, but I wanted accountability. I wanted Miguel and Brittany to face consequences for their calculated cruelty. I wanted other families to understand how generosity could be weaponized against the people who showed it. Most importantly, I wanted my voice back, my dignity back, my right to be treated with basic human respect by the people I'd sacrificed everything to help. I want people to know what really happened, I said finally. I want other parents and grandparents to understand how this kind of manipulation works, so they can protect themselves. And I want Miguel and Brittany to understand that their actions have consequences. Are you prepared for this to become public? Are you prepared for Miguel to be angry with you? David, Miguel excluded me from Sophia's birthday party in the house I gave him, then moved out to rent it for profit without even telling me. I don't think our relationship can get much worse. That evening, David called me back with a proposal that both terrified and excited me. May, I've been thinking about your situation, and I believe it would make a powerful human interest story for the Tribune. Elder abuse, family manipulation, the dark side of generosity. It's a story that could help other people recognize these patterns in their own families. You want to write about this publicly? Only with your permission and cooperation. You'd have complete control over what information to include and how to present it. But I think your story deserves to be told, and I think Miguel and Brittany deserve to face public scrutiny for their behavior. The idea of making my family's dysfunction public felt overwhelming but also liberating. For months, I'd been isolated with my hurt and confusion, convinced that I was somehow at fault for the way my generosity had been received. The prospect of having my experience validated and shared felt like emerging from a dark room into sunlight. What would happen if you published the story? Well, the Tribune has a significant readership in Phoenix and Scottsdale. Miguel and Brittany's friends, neighbors, and colleagues would likely see it. There might be social consequences for them, professional consequences possibly. And other families dealing with similar situations might reach out to you for support or advice. I thought about Miguel reading his behavior described in print, about Brittany having to explain to her new Scottsdale neighbors why her mother-in-law was publicly discussing their family dynamics. Part of me felt guilty for considering such exposure, but a larger part of me felt that accountability was long overdue. I need some time to think about it. Of course. But May, while you're thinking, I want you to consider something. Right now, Miguel and Brittany are counting on your silence, on your shame, on your continued willingness to absorb their mistreatment without consequences. They're betting that you'll accept being erased from their lives rather than risk conflict or public attention. David was right. My silence was protecting them while isolating me. My willingness to absorb their behavior without resistance was enabling them to continue treating me badly while profiting from my generosity. That night, I called Carmen to discuss David's proposal. My sister listened thoughtfully as I explained the potential newspaper story and my conflicted feelings about making our family situation public. May, I'm going to tell you something I probably should have said months ago. Miguel and Brittany have been treating you terribly, and you've been making excuses for them because you love them and because you feel guilty about having expectations after giving them such an enormous gift. But Carmen, they're my family. Family doesn't exclude you from birthday parties and then profit from your generosity behind your back. Family doesn't move to a new house without telling you, while renting out the home you gave them. What Miguel and Brittany have done to you isn't family behavior, it's exploitation. Carmen's words carried the weight of perspective I'd been missing. I'd been so focused on maintaining peace and preserving relationships that I'd allowed myself to be systematically mistreated by the people who should have been most grateful for my sacrifice. Do you think I should let David write the story? I think you should do whatever makes you feel empowered instead of victimized. For months, you've been absorbing their behavior and questioning yourself. Maybe it's time for them to face some questions instead. The next morning, I called David and gave him permission to proceed with the story. We spent the following week conducting detailed interviews, reviewing documentation, and crafting a narrative that was both factually accurate and emotionally honest. David was meticulous about protecting my dignity while clearly illustrating the pattern of exploitation and manipulation I'd experienced. The story was scheduled to run in the Sunday edition of the Tribune, which had the largest readership of the week. David warned me that once the article was published, there would likely be immediate consequences and possibly media attention beyond the initial piece. Are you sure you're ready for this, Tia? I'm ready for people to know the truth about what happened to me. I'm ready to stop protecting people who haven't protected me. The article ran with the headline, "The High Cost of Generosity, a Phoenix Grandmother's Story of Family Betrayal." David had written it with careful attention to the broader social implications, while clearly detailing the specific actions Miguel and Brittany had taken. He included quotes from elder abuse experts, statistics about financial exploitation within families, and resources for other people who might be experiencing similar situations. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By Sunday afternoon, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from other Tribune readers who wanted to share their own stories of family manipulation and financial exploitation. Many were elderly parents who'd made generous gifts to adult children, only to find themselves excluded from the very lives they'd tried to support. But the most significant response came Tuesday morning, when Miguel called me for the first time in 2 months, his voice shaking with rage. "Mom, what the hell did you do? Everyone we know has seen that newspaper article. Brittany's crying, my boss asked me about it. Our neighbors are looking at us like we're criminals. I told the truth about what happened, Miguel. You made us look like monsters. You made it sound like we planned to take advantage of you from the beginning. Didn't you?" I asked quietly. "Of course not. We appreciated your gift, but that doesn't mean we owe you unlimited access to our lives forever." I never asked for unlimited access, Miguel. I asked to be treated like a family member instead of an inconvenience. I asked to be included in my granddaughter's birthday party. I asked to be told when you moved out of the house I gave you to rent it for profit. The rental income helps us afford the new house. We never said we plan to live in your house forever. But you never said you planned to move out either. You let me believe you were building a life there, that Sophia would grow up there, that the house would remain in our family. Instead, you used it as a stepping stone to something better while pushing me out of your life. Miguel was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, less angry and more defensive. Mom, maybe we could have handled some things better, but publishing that article was vindictive and cruel. You've humiliated us publicly. Miguel, you excluded me from family events, moved without telling me, and profited from my generosity while treating me like a burden. If you feel humiliated by people knowing about your behavior, maybe you should examine the behavior itself. So what do you want now? Do you want us to move back into the house? Do you want us to pay you back? What will make this right? It was a fair question, and one I'd been considering since deciding to make our situation public. What did I want now that the truth was exposed? I want to be treated with respect, I said. I want to be included in Sophia's life as her grandmother. I want honest communication instead of manipulation and exclusion. And I want you to acknowledge that the way you've treated me has been wrong. And if we do those things, will you ask the newspaper to retract the story? Miguel, the story is true. I can't retract truth, and I wouldn't want to. But if you're genuinely willing to repair our relationship and treat me like family instead of an inconvenience, then we can move forward from here. That conversation was the beginning of a very difficult process of renegotiating our family dynamic. The public attention from the newspaper article had created pressure for Miguel and Brittany to address their behavior, but it had also created resentment and defensiveness that made honest communication challenging. Over the following weeks, I received dozens of calls and letters from other families dealing with similar situations. Many were elderly parents who'd made generous financial gifts to adult children, only to find themselves marginalized in the very lives they'd tried to support. Others were adult children who'd accepted help from parents and felt burdened by ongoing expectations or involvement. The conversations with other families helped me understand that my situation, while painful and personal, was part of a larger pattern of how generosity and dependency can create unhealthy power dynamics within families. Some parents used financial gifts as tools of control, maintaining involvement and influence long after their children should have been independent. Some adult children accepted parental help while resenting the ongoing connection and obligation it implied. But many situations, like mine, involved genuinely generous parents whose gifts were accepted and then weaponized against them by adult children who preferred the financial benefits without the ongoing relationship responsibilities. One letter particularly moved me. It came from a woman named Patricia in Tucson whose daughter had accepted help with a house down payment, then gradually excluded Patricia from family events while using guilt and manipulation to maintain the financial support. Reading your story made me realize I wasn't crazy, Patricia wrote. I've been questioning myself for months, wondering if I was being too needy or too involved. But your experience helped me see that my daughter's behavior isn't about boundaries or independence. It's about exploitation disguised as boundary setting. Patricia's letter crystallized something important for me. The language of healthy boundaries and family independence had been used to justify and disguise what was actually financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. Miguel and Brittany hadn't been setting reasonable limits on our relationship. They'd been systematically excluding me while profiting from my generosity. 3 weeks after the article was published, Brittany called me for the first time since the property transfer. Her voice was tight with emotion, and I could tell the conversation was difficult for her. May, I want to apologize for how we've handled things. Miguel and I have been talking about the article and about your feelings, and we realize we may have been unfair to you. May have been unfair? We were unfair, Brittany corrected herself. We got so focused on establishing our independence and our own family identity that we lost sight of how our actions were affecting you. We never meant to make you feel excluded or unwanted. But you did exclude me, Brittany. You excluded me from Sophia's birthday party, from knowing about your move, from being part of your family's life while using the house I gave you to fund your new lifestyle. You're right, and I'm sorry. We want to find a way to repair our relationship and include you in Sophia's life the way a grandmother should be included. The apology felt genuine, but I'd learned to be cautious about accepting promises from Miguel and Brittany without seeing sustained changes in behavior. What does that look like specifically? I asked. We'd like to have regular family dinners, maybe twice a month. We want you to be included in Sophia's important events and milestones. And we want to be honest with you about major decisions that affect our family instead of keeping you in the dark. And what about the house situation? Brittany was quiet for a moment. We can't move back into the house, May. Our life is in Scottsdale now, and the rental income is helping us with our mortgage. But we understand that the way we handled the transition was wrong, and we're willing to discuss how to make that situation more fair to you. I wasn't sure what more fair meant, but at least they were acknowledging that the current arrangement was problematic. More importantly, they were expressing willingness to include me in their lives in meaningful ways, rather than treating me like an unwelcome obligation. I'd like to see some evidence of these changes before I trust that things will be different, I said. I've heard promises before. Of course. We understand that we need to rebuild your trust through our actions, not just our words. The first test came the following weekend, when Brittany called to invite me to Sophia's preschool graduation ceremony. It was a small event, just parents and grandparents watching 3-year-olds receive certificates for completing their first year of school, but it represented exactly the kind of milestone I'd been excluded from for months. I arrived at the preschool to find Miguel and Brittany saving a seat for me in the front row, treating me like a welcome family member rather than an inconvenient obligation. Sophia ran to me when she saw me, wrapping her small arms around my legs with the pure joy that only grandchildren can express. Abuela Mai, you came to see me graduate. I wouldn't miss it, am I, amor? I said, lifting her up for a hug. I'm so proud of you. During the ceremony, Miguel leaned over and spoke quietly. Mom, I know we have a lot of work to do to repair our relationship, but I want you to know that Brittany and I are committed to making things right. We love you, and we want Sophia to have a close relationship with her grandmother. It was a small gesture, but it represented a significant shift from the months of exclusion and manipulation I'd endured. For the first time since giving them the house, I felt like I was being treated like a valued family member, rather than an unwelcome burden. After the ceremony, Brittany approached me with what looked like genuine nervousness. May, I know this doesn't make up for everything that's happened, but Miguel and I would like to take you to dinner tonight to celebrate Sophia's graduation, and to talk more about how we can move forward as a family. The dinner was awkward at first, with all of us carefully choosing our words and avoiding the most difficult topics. But as the evening progressed, Miguel and Brittany began acknowledging specific ways they'd hurt me, and expressing genuine remorse for their behavior. Mom, we got caught up in trying to prove our independence and establish our own family identity, Miguel said. But we went too far in the other direction, excluding you instead of just setting healthy boundaries. We also realized that we took your generosity for granted, Brittany added. The house was an incredible gift that changed our entire lives, and instead of appreciating that and maintaining our relationship with you, we somehow convinced ourselves that accepting the gift meant we didn't owe you basic respect and inclusion. These acknowledgments felt like the beginning of genuine accountability, though I knew that rebuilding trust would require sustained changes in behavior rather than just apologetic words. I appreciate your apologies, I said, but I need to see consistent evidence that you value me as Sophia's grandmother and as a member of this family. I need to feel welcome in your lives, not tolerated. You will, Miguel promised. We're going to do better. Over the following months, Miguel and Brittany did begin treating me differently. They included me in family decisions, invited me to events without prompting, and stopped making me feel like my presence was an inconvenience. Sophia and I were able to develop the kind of close grandparent-grandchild relationship I'd always hoped for, with regular visits, special outings, and shared activities. The house situation remained complicated. Miguel and Brittany continued renting it out for income, which still felt uncomfortable to me, but they began sharing the rental proceeds with me, acknowledging that the property had been my gift, and that I deserved some benefit from its current use. More importantly, they began treating me like a family member whose opinions and feelings mattered, rather than an obligation to be managed and minimized. The newspaper article had created public accountability that forced Miguel and Brittany to examine their behavior and face consequences for their treatment of me. But the real change came from their recognition that they'd been wrong, and their genuine commitment to rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than exploitation. 6 months after the article was published, I was sitting in Miguel and Brittany's new backyard in Scottsdale, watching Sophia play on the swing set Miguel had installed, when Brittany sat down beside me with 2 cups of coffee. May, I want to thank you for not giving up on us, she said, I know we put you through hell, and you would have been justified in cutting us out of your life completely. But your willingness to fight for our relationship, even when it meant exposing our bad behavior publicly, helped us realize what we were losing. I fought for our relationship because I love you and Miguel and Sofia, I said. But I also fought for myself, for my right to be treated with dignity and respect by the people I'd sacrificed everything to help. We understand that now. And we're grateful that you refused to just disappear quietly like we were hoping you would. It was a remarkable admission. Brittany was acknowledging that they'd wanted me to disappear, to accept my exclusion without resistance, to allow them to profit from my generosity while erasing me from their lives. I almost did disappear, I said. For months, I convinced myself that I was the problem, that my expectations were unreasonable, that I deserved to be excluded because I hadn't let go of the house properly. You weren't the problem, May. We were selfish and manipulative, and we used your love for us as a weapon against you. I'm ashamed of how we behaved. Looking at Sofia playing happily in the yard, included in family events, valued as her grandmother, I realized that my decision to expose the truth publicly had been the right one. Sometimes love requires accountability. Sometimes the people who claim to care about you need to face consequences for their actions before they're willing to change. The house I'd given away was still generating rental income for Miguel and Brittany, but I was no longer excluded from the family I'd tried to support. My generosity had been manipulated and exploited, but my refusal to accept that treatment silently had ultimately restored my place in Sofia's life and Miguel's life. Most importantly, I'd learned that my voice mattered, that my dignity was worth fighting for, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable bad behavior, even when that behavior comes from people you love. The golden years I'd imagined spending close to my family hadn't unfolded the way I'd planned, but they'd become something more valuable. Years when I'd learned to value myself enough to demand better treatment, to use my voice instead of suffering in silence, and to understand that real love requires mutual respect rather than silent endurance. 1 year after the newspaper article changed everything, I was standing in the kitchen of my old house for the first time since I'd signed it over to Miguel and Brittany. The current tenants, a young couple named Jennifer and Mark, had invited me for coffee after reading about my story and recognizing the address. They wanted to meet the woman who had built the home they now rented, and Miguel had surprisingly agreed to the meeting. Mrs. Rodriguez, we've taken such good care of this place, Jennifer said, pouring coffee into mugs that weren't mine, in the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals. We know how much this house means to you, and we've tried to honor its history. Looking around the familiar space, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. The kitchen had been updated with modern fixtures, and the walls were painted colors I wouldn't have chosen. But the bones of the house remained the same. Carlos's handmade cabinets still lined the walls, though they'd been refinished. The window where I used to watch for Miguel's school bus still framed the desert garden, though it was now maintained by a landscaping service, rather than my own hands. You've done a beautiful job, I said honestly. The house feels loved, which is what matters most. Mark, a soft-spoken man who reminded me of Miguel at that age, showed me through the rooms with obvious pride in their care of the property. They'd converted Carlos's workshop back into a proper garage, but they'd saved his workbench and tool organization system, somehow understanding that these details mattered to the house's history. We're hoping to buy the house eventually, Jennifer said as we returned to the kitchen. Your son has said he might consider selling to us when we're in a better financial position. This was news to me. Miguel hadn't mentioned any possibility of selling the house to the tenants, though I realized he wasn't obligated to discuss his business decisions with me. Still, after everything we'd been through, I'd hoped for more transparency about major choices involving the property I'd given him. After the visit, I called Miguel to ask about his potential plans to sell the house. His response revealed how much our relationship had truly changed since the public reckoning of the previous year. Mom, I should have mentioned that to you. Jennifer and Mark have been great tenants, and they love the house. If they can qualify for a mortgage in the next couple of years, I'm thinking about selling to them, rather than dealing with ongoing property management. And you're comfortable with the idea of the house leaving our family permanently? Miguel was quiet for a moment, considering the question more seriously than he might have in the past. To be honest, I think it might be better for everyone. Jennifer and Mark will take care of it the way it deserves, and selling would give Brittany and me the capital to really establish our life in Scottsdale without the ongoing connection to the old neighborhood. I felt a pang of sadness at the idea of the house being sold to strangers, but I also recognized the wisdom in Miguel's reasoning. The house had been a source of conflict and complicated emotions for all of us. Perhaps its highest purpose was to provide security and happiness for a young family who would love it without the baggage of our family history. I think that might be the right decision, I said, surprising myself with how easily I accepted the idea. But I'd appreciate being included in those conversations as they develop, since the house was my gift to you originally. Of course, Mom. I should have talked to you about it from the beginning. This exchange represented the new dynamic Miguel and I had developed over the past year. He included me in decisions that affected family matters, and I respected his autonomy as an adult who owned the property outright. It wasn't the relationship I'd originally imagined when I gave him the house, but it was honest and respectful in ways our previous dynamic had never been. The transformation in our family relationships had ripple effects I hadn't anticipated. Sophia, now 4 years old, had developed a close bond with me that felt natural and unforced. She spent one Saturday afternoon each month at my apartment in Las Flores, where we baked cookies, worked on art projects, and read stories together. These visits were precious to both of us, unmarked by the tension and manipulation that had characterized my relationship with her parents during the worst period. Abuela May, Sophia said during one of our Saturday visits, why do you live in the little house instead of the big house where Mommy and Daddy used to live? It was a complicated question for a 4-year-old, but I'd learned the importance of age-appropriate honesty in all my relationships. Well, mi amor, I gave that big house to your daddy because I wanted your family to have a beautiful place to live. Then your mommy and daddy decided they wanted to live in a different house in Scottsdale, so now other people live in the big house and your daddy uses the money they pay to help take care of your family. But you could live there again if you wanted to. No, sweetheart. When I gave the house to your daddy, it became his house, completely. That means he gets to decide who lives there. Sophia considered this with the seriousness that children bring to trying to understand adult relationships. Are you sad that you don't live in the big house anymore? Sometimes I miss it, I said. But I'm happy that it helped your family, and I'm happy that nice people like Jennifer and Mark get to live there now. And I really love having my own little place where you can come visit me and we can make cookies whenever we want. Sophia seemed satisfied with this explanation, and I realized that my own acceptance of the situation had finally become genuine rather than forced. The house had served its purpose in my life, and its current purpose was different but equally valid. The broader changes in our family dynamic became most apparent during Sophia's 4th birthday party, which took place in Miguel and Brittany's Scottsdale backyard on a perfect April afternoon. Unlike the previous year's celebration that I'd discovered accidentally, this party included me as an honored guest, rather than an unwelcome intruder. I arrived early to help with setup, something I would never have been invited to do during the period of exclusion. Brittany had asked for my advice on decorations, and had specifically requested that I bring my famous tres leches cake, the same recipe I'd made for Miguel's childhood birthday parties. May, could you help me figure out where to put the gift table? Brittany asked, treating me like a valued family member whose opinion mattered. I want Sophia to be able to see all her presents, but I don't want them to overwhelm the space. Working together to create a beautiful celebration for my granddaughter felt like a healing I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time in years, I felt useful and appreciated, rather than tolerated or excluded. When the guests arrived, Miguel introduced me proudly as Sophia's grandmother, including me in conversations and making sure I felt welcome among their friends. Several people commented on how much Sophia resembled me and how obvious it was that we had a special bond. Sophia talks about her Abuela May all the time, one of Brittany's friends mentioned. She's always telling us about the cookies you make together and the stories you read. Hearing that Sophia spoke about me positively to her parents' friends felt like a vindication of all the painful work we'd done to rebuild our relationships. I was no longer a source of tension or an inconvenient obligation. I was Sophia's beloved grandmother, and that role was valued and celebrated by the entire family. During the party, I watched Miguel and Brittany interact with each other and with their guests, and I could see how much they'd grown as people over the past year. The crisis of the newspaper article and its aftermath had forced them to examine their own behavior and values in ways that had clearly been beneficial for their relationship and their parenting. They were more confident as hosts, more generous in their interactions with others, and more thoughtful about how their actions affected the people around them. The entitled, manipulative behavior they'd shown me during the worst period seemed to have been replaced by genuine consideration for others' feelings and needs. After the guests left, as we cleaned up the party debris, Brittany approached me with something that looked like nervous excitement. Miguel and I have some news we wanted to share with you privately before we tell anyone else. My first thought was another pregnancy, which would have been wonderful news. But Brittany's expression suggested something different, more complex. We've been talking about our long-term plans, and we've decided that when Jennifer and Mark are ready to buy the rental house, we want to use part of the proceeds to establish a college fund for Sophia with your name on it. I was confused. What do you mean, with my name on it? Miguel stepped forward to explain. We want to call it the May Rodriguez Education Fund. We've realized that Sophia's future education opportunities are only possible because of the gift you gave us, and we want her to understand that connection. We also want to contribute a portion of our own income to the fund every month, as a way of honoring your original generosity. The gesture was so unexpected and meaningful that I felt tears forming in my eyes. They weren't just acknowledging my financial contribution to their family's stability. They were creating a lasting legacy that would connect my sacrifice to Sophia's future success. Are you sure about this? I asked. It's a beautiful idea, but you don't owe me any kind of memorial or tribute. We don't see it as something we owe you, Brittany said. We see it as something we want to do because we love you, and because we want Sophia to understand how much her grandmother's love contributed to everything good in her life. This conversation marked a milestone in our healing that I hadn't dared to hope for. Miguel and Brittany weren't just including me in their lives, they were actively working to ensure that my contributions to their family would be remembered and honored as Sophia grew up. 6 months later, the education fund became reality when Jennifer and Mark successfully purchased the house with a mortgage they'd qualified for after improving their credit and saving for a larger down payment. The sale provided Miguel and Brittany with a substantial sum that they divided between their own savings, Sophia's education fund, and a surprising gift to me. Mom, Miguel said when he brought me the check, this is your share of the sale proceeds. Brittany and I talked about it extensively, and we both agree that you deserve to benefit financially from the house sale, since the house was originally your gift to us. The amount was significant, more than I'd ever expected to see from the property transaction. It represented not just money, but acknowledgement that my original generosity had created value that belonged partly to me, even though I'd legally transferred ownership years earlier. Miguel, you don't have to do this. The house was a gift. It was a gift that we used as a stepping stone to build our current life. The sale profits exist because of your original generosity, and it's only fair that you share in the benefits. Accepting the money felt strange after everything we'd been through, but I recognized it as another gesture of respect and acknowledgement. Miguel and Brittany were actively working to repair the damage they'd caused to our relationship, and this financial gesture was part of that healing process. With the proceeds from the house sale, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of simply adding the money to my retirement savings, I used it to establish a scholarship fund at the local community college for single mothers returning to education. The May Rodriguez Second Chance Scholarship would provide tuition assistance for women who'd sacrificed their own educational goals to raise families, and were now ready to pursue their dreams. When I announced this decision to Miguel and Brittany, their reaction revealed how much our relationship had truly evolved. Mom, that's incredible, Miguel said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. You're turning everything that happened with our family into something that will help other women build better futures for themselves. What made you think of focusing on single mothers? Brittany asked. Because I realized that my story isn't just about family betrayal and reconciliation. It's about what happens when women give up their own dreams and identities to support other people's goals. and how difficult it can be to reclaim your sense of self when those relationships change. The scholarship fund became a source of deep satisfaction for me, a way to transform my personal experience of sacrifice and recovery into tangible help for other women facing similar challenges. Each semester, I met with the scholarship recipients to hear their stories and offer encouragement for their educational journeys. One recipient, Maria Santos, was a 38-year-old woman who dropped out of college 20 years earlier to raise her children after her husband left. She was now pursuing a nursing degree while working part-time and caring for her teenage daughter. "Mrs. Rodriguez, your scholarship isn't just paying for my classes," Maria told me during one of our meetings. "It's giving me hope that it's not too late to become the person I always wanted to be." Maria's words resonated deeply with me because they captured something essential about my own journey. It hadn't been too late for me to reclaim my voice, to demand better treatment, to create meaning from my experiences. The scholarship fund allowed me to help other women realize that their dreams and ambitions mattered, regardless of how long they'd been set aside. 2 years after the newspaper article changed everything, I was invited to speak at a conference on elder abuse prevention in Tucson. The invitation came from a coalition of social workers and advocates who'd read about my experience and wanted me to share my story with professionals who worked with vulnerable older adults. Standing at the podium in front of 200 social workers, attorneys, and healthcare providers, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced since my teaching days. My painful experience with Miguel and Brittany had become a teaching tool that could help other families recognize and address similar patterns of manipulation and exploitation. Financial elder abuse often happens gradually, I told the audience, and it's frequently perpetrated by family members who frame their exploitation as boundary setting or independence building. The victim may feel guilty for having expectations after making generous gifts, and that guilt can be weaponized to justify continued mistreatment. After my presentation, several attendees approached me with questions and their own stories of clients or family members who'd experienced similar situations. One social worker, Patricia Hawkins, asked if I'd be willing to serve on a task force developing educational materials for older adults about protecting themselves from family-based financial exploitation. "Your story illustrates perfectly how good intentions can be manipulated," Patricia said. "We need voices like yours to help other people recognize these patterns before they lose their homes, their savings, or their family relationships." Joining the task force gave me another outlet for transforming my experience into positive change. We developed brochures, presentations, and support group resources for older adults who were considering major financial gifts to family members, or who suspected they were being exploited by people they trusted. The work was emotionally challenging because it required me to relive aspects of my experience with Miguel and Brittany repeatedly, but it was also deeply rewarding to know that my story might prevent other families from experiencing similar pain and conflict. During one task force meeting, I met Eleanor Washington, a 70-year-old woman whose daughter had convinced her to add her name to Eleanor's bank accounts for emergencies, then systematically drained Eleanor's life savings over 2 years. Eleanor's situation was more severe than mine had been, but the underlying pattern of manipulation and exploitation was remarkably similar. "Reading about your experience helped me realize that I wasn't stupid or naive," Eleanor told me. "I was a loving mother who trusted my daughter, and she took advantage of that trust. But like you, I found my voice and fought back." Eleanor had successfully recovered most of her stolen savings through legal action, and her daughter was facing criminal charges for elder financial abuse. But the emotional recovery was ongoing, just as mine had been. "Do you still have a relationship with your daughter?" I asked. "We're working on it. She's in counseling and seems genuinely remorseful, but rebuilding trust after that level of betrayal takes time. How did you manage to repair things with your son?" "It took public accountability, genuine remorse on their part, and consistent changes in behavior over time," I said. "But the key was that I stopped accepting their mistreatment and insisted on being treated with respect. Once I valued myself enough to demand better, they started treating me better." These conversations with other women who'd experienced family-based financial exploitation helped me understand that my story with Miguel and Brittany represented both a common pattern and a relatively positive outcome. Many families never recovered from the trust violations and manipulation that we'd experienced. The fact that we'd been able to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of mutual respect was actually remarkable. On Sophia's 5th birthday, as I watched her blow out candles on the tres leches cake I'd made in my own kitchen at Las Flores, I reflected on how dramatically our family dynamics had changed over the 3 years since I'd given Miguel and Brittany the house. The little girl celebrating her birthday was growing up, knowing that her abuela May was a valued and cherished member of her family. She would never experience the confusion and sadness of having a grandmother who was excluded from family celebrations, or treated as an inconvenience. Miguel and Brittany had grown into people who understood the value of family relationships and the importance of treating older relatives with respect and appreciation. Their parenting reflected the lessons they'd learned from our crisis and reconciliation. I had discovered that my voice mattered, that my dignity was worth fighting for, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to enable their bad behavior. The woman who'd given away her house in hopes of securing her place in her family's life had learned that real security came from valuing herself enough to demand better treatment. The scholarship fund continued to help women rebuild their lives after sacrificing their own dreams for family obligations. The task force work was preventing other families from experiencing the pain and conflict we'd endured. My story had become larger than just my personal experience. It had become a tool for positive change in other people's lives. Standing in Miguel and Brittany's backyard, watching Sophia play with her friends while her parents treated me like the honored family member I deserved to be, I realized that the house I'd given away had ultimately given me everything I'd hoped for. Not in the way I'd originally imagined, but in a way that was more authentic and sustainable. I'd given Miguel and Brittany a house, and through all the pain and conflict that followed, they'd given me something more valuable. The knowledge that I was worth fighting for, that my relationships could be honest rather than performative, and that real love required mutual respect rather than silent endurance. The garage where I'd once been forced to sleep felt like a distant memory, a symbol of how low I'd allowed others to value me. Now, sitting at their dinner table as an honored guest, included in their decisions and valued for my opinions, I understood that the real gift hadn't been the house at all. The real gift had been learning that I was worth more than I'd ever believed, and that true family relationships were built on respect and appreciation rather than obligation and manipulation. Miguel and Brittany had learned to treat me well not because they owed me for my generosity, but because they genuinely valued my presence in their lives. And Sophia would grow up understanding that love and respect were not negotiable, that family relationships required effort and consideration from all parties, and that her abuela Mai was someone worth knowing, loving, and learning from. In the end, the house had served its purpose perfectly. Not as a guarantee of family connection, but as a catalyst for discovering what real connection actually required. The woman who'd signed over the deed 3 years earlier had been hoping to buy love and security through generosity. The woman sitting in that Scottsdale backyard, watching her granddaughter blow out birthday candles, had learned that love and security couldn't be purchased. They had to be earned through mutual respect, honest communication, and the courage to demand better when you deserved it. Sometimes the most generous thing you can give someone is the opportunity to become a better person. And sometimes the most generous thing you can give yourself is the chance to discover your own worth, even when that discovery requires pain, conflict, and the willingness to risk everything you thought you wanted in pursuit of what you actually deserved. The house was gone, but the family was stronger. The money was spent, but the relationships were richer. The garage was a memory, but the dignity was permanent. And that, I realized, was worth every sleepless night, every tear, every moment of doubt I'd endured to get here. May Rodriguez had finally come home, not to a building, but to her own sense of worth, and that was a place no one could ever take away from her again. 5 years had passed since that terrible morning when I'd discovered the rental sign in my former front yard, and I was standing in the auditorium of Phoenix Community College watching Maria Santos walk across the stage to receive her nursing degree. She was the third recipient of the May Rodriguez Second Chance Scholarship to graduate, and each ceremony filled me with the same profound sense of purpose and pride. Maria's teenage daughter Carmen was sitting next to me, tears streaming down her face as she watched her mother achieve the dream she'd deferred for 18 years. After the ceremony, Maria found me in the crowd and embraced me with the kind of gratitude that made every difficult moment of my own journey worthwhile. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I start my job at Phoenix Children's Hospital next week," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. When I was 19 and pregnant and dropping out of college, I never imagined I'd be standing here as a registered nurse. Your scholarship didn't just pay for my education. It gave me back my belief in myself. Carmen, now 18 and headed to Arizona State University on her own academic scholarship, looked at me with the kind of respect I'd once hoped to see in Sophia's eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez, my mom talks about you all the time. She says you taught her that it's never too late to fight for what you deserve. These moments had become the cornerstone of my new life, the evidence that my painful experience with Miguel and Brittany had served a purpose larger than my own family's dysfunction. The scholarship fund had grown from my original contribution to include donations from community members who'd read about my story and wanted to support women rebuilding their lives after sacrifice and setback. Dr. Janet Morrison, the Dean of Continuing Education at Phoenix Community College, approached our small celebration group with a proposal that would expand the program's impact even further. May, I've been authorized to offer you a part-time position as a student mentor and scholarship coordinator, Dr. Morrison said. We've seen how much our scholarship recipients benefit from your personal guidance, and we'd like to formalize that support system. The offer represented everything I'd never dared to hope for when I was sitting in that garage, feeling worthless and discarded by the people I'd sacrificed everything to help. At 67 years old, I was being offered the opportunity to return to the educational field I'd loved, to help women rebuild their lives, to transform my personal experience into professional purpose. What would the position entail? I asked, though I was already certain I wanted to accept. You'd meet individually with scholarship recipients each month to provide guidance and support. You'd help with scholarship selection and program development. And you'd speak to community groups about educational opportunities for non-traditional students. It was exactly the kind of work that would give structure and meaning to my retirement years, while allowing me to continue transforming my experience into positive change for other women. I'd be honored to accept, I said. 3 weeks later, I was moving into a small office at Phoenix Community College with a nameplate that read, May Rodriguez, Student Mentor and Scholarship Coordinator. The space was modest, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a bookshelf, but it represented something I'd thought I'd lost forever. Professional identity and purpose beyond my roles as wife, mother, and grandmother. My first official mentoring appointment was with Rosa Delgado, a 42-year-old woman who'd been caring for her disabled mother while working as a house cleaner for 15 years. Rosa wanted to pursue a certificate in medical coding, but she was overwhelmed by the prospect of balancing school with her caregiving responsibilities and part-time work. Mrs. Rodriguez, I read about your scholarship in the newspaper, and your story made me think maybe it's not too late for me to try again, Rosa said during our first meeting. But I'm scared. What if I can't handle the coursework? What if I'm too old to learn new skills? Rosa's fears echoed my own doubts from years earlier, when I'd wondered if I was too old to reclaim my independence and rebuild my life after giving away everything I thought defined me. Rosa, can I ask you something? How did you manage to care for your mother for 15 years while supporting yourself financially? That requires incredible organization, dedication, and problem-solving skills. I guess I just did what needed to be done. Exactly. You developed the skills you needed to handle an enormously challenging situation. School is just another challenge that requires the same kind of determination and resourcefulness you've been using for years. Over the following months, I watched Rosa transform from a hesitant, self-doubting woman into a confident student who was excelling in her coursework while maintaining her caregiving responsibilities. Her success reminded me that the women who sought these second-chance opportunities weren't starting from nothing. They were building on foundations of strength and resilience they'd developed through years of sacrifice and survival. My work at the college brought me into contact with dozens of women whose stories shared common themes with my own experience. Many had given up their educational and career goals to support husbands' ambitions or children's needs. Some had been told by family members that their dreams were impractical or selfish. Others had been systematically discouraged from pursuing independence by people who benefited from their dependence. Linda Patterson, a 55-year-old woman pursuing a degree in social work, told me during one of our mentoring sessions that her ex-husband had convinced her for 20 years that she was too emotional to work outside the home, that her role was to support his career rather than develop her own. It took me 10 years after our divorce to realize that what he called too emotional was actually empathy and compassion. Exactly the qualities that make someone good at social work, Linda said. I wasted decades believing his assessment of my capabilities instead of trusting my own judgment. Linda's story resonated deeply with my own experience of accepting other people's diminished assessment of my worth, rather than insisting on my own value. The work at the college was healing for me as much as it was helpful for the women I mentored, because it reinforced daily that my instincts about my own capabilities had been correct all along. 6 months into my new position, I received an unexpected call from Miguel that would test how much our relationship had truly evolved. Mom, I have something I need to tell you, and I'm not sure how you're going to react, Miguel said, his voice carrying the same nervous energy I remembered from his childhood when he'd broken something valuable. What's going on, Mijo? Brittany and I are getting divorced. The news hit me like a physical blow, not because I was shocked by the possibility, but because I immediately worried about Sophia and about the stability we'd all worked so hard to rebuild. Are you okay? Is Sophia okay? What happened? We're both okay, and we're committed to making sure Sophia adjusts as well as possible. It's been coming for a while. We've grown in different directions, and we finally admitted that we're better as co-parents than as married partners. Miguel's tone was mature and thoughtful, lacking the defensiveness and blame that had characterized his communication during the worst period of our family crisis. Whatever had led to this decision, he was handling it with more wisdom than he'd shown during his conflict with me. I'm sorry this is happening, Miguel. Divorce is painful even when it's the right decision. How can I help? Actually, that's why I'm calling. Brittany and I both want you to remain close to Sophia throughout this transition. We want her to know that even though her parents' marriage is ending, her extended family relationships are stable and supportive. This request represented a complete reversal from the Miguel, who had once excluded me from family events and treated my presence as an inconvenience. Now he was actively seeking my involvement during a family crisis, recognizing that my relationship with Sophia was valuable rather than burdensome. Of course I'll be there for Sophia in whatever way helps her most. And I want you to know that I'm here for both you and Brittany as you navigate this transition. Thank you, Mom. I know our relationship went through a really difficult period, but having you as a stable, supportive presence in Sophia's life means everything to both of us right now. Over the following months, I watched Miguel and Brittany handle their divorce with remarkable maturity and consideration for Sophia's well-being. They maintained shared custody arrangements that prioritized Sophia's stability, and they both made efforts to include me in their co-parenting decisions when my input was relevant. Sophia, now 6 years old and more perceptive than I'd realized, asked me directly about the changes in her family during one of our Saturday afternoon visits. Abuela May, are you sad that Mommy and Daddy don't live together anymore? I'm sad that families sometimes have to change in ways that feel difficult, I said carefully. But I'm not sad that your Mommy and Daddy are making decisions that help them be happier and better parents to you. Are you going to stop being my grandmother because they're divorced? The question broke my heart because it revealed that Sophia had been worrying about losing relationships as a result of her parents' separation. It also reminded me how my own exclusion from the family during her early years might have created anxiety about the stability of family connections. Sophia, mi amor, I will be your grandmother forever, no matter what changes happen in your family. Divorce can't change the fact that you're my granddaughter and I'm your abuela. That relationship belongs to just you and me. Sophia's relief was visible, and I realized that my presence during this family transition was providing exactly the kind of stability and continuity I'd hoped to offer when I originally gave Miguel and Brittany the house years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. During their marriage, Miguel and Brittany had excluded me from their family life while profiting from my generosity. Now, during their divorce, they were actively including me and valuing my relationship with Sophia as a source of stability during uncertainty. 8 months after Miguel and Brittany's separation was finalized, I received another unexpected call, this time from Brittany. May, I wanted to talk to you about something personal, and I hope you won't think I'm overstepping boundaries by calling you directly. Since the divorce, Brittany and I had maintained a cordial relationship focused on Sophia's well-being, but we hadn't developed the kind of independent friendship that would typically involve personal confidences. Of course, Brittany. What's on your mind? I've been doing a lot of thinking about my life and my future, and I realize that I want to go back to school to finish my degree. I was wondering if you could give me some advice about returning to education as an older student. Brittany was 32, hardly an older student by most standards, but her request touched me deeply because it represented exactly the kind of personal growth and empowerment I'd been supporting through my work at the college. What field are you interested in pursuing? Elementary education. I've been volunteering in Sophia's classroom, and I've realized that working with children is something I'm passionate about. But I'm nervous about starting college again after so many years, especially as a single mother. The conversation that followed was one of the most honest and meaningful exchanges Brittany and I had ever had. She talked about feeling lost in her identity after the divorce, about wanting to build a career that would provide both financial security and personal fulfillment, about her fears of academic failure, and her guilt about taking time away from Sophia to pursue her own goals. Brittany, you've been successfully managing a household, raising a child, and navigating a complex divorce while maintaining a positive co-parenting relationship with Miguel. Those experiences have given you exactly the kinds of skills that make someone successful in college and in teaching. But what if I'm not smart enough? What if I've been out of school too long to keep up with younger students? Intelligence isn't about age, it's about curiosity and persistence. And life experience is an asset in education, not a liability. The perspective you bring as a mother and as someone who's overcome challenges will make you a better teacher than someone who's never faced real difficulties. By the end of our conversation, Brittany had decided to apply for admission to Arizona State University's education program for the following fall semester. More significantly, she'd asked if she could apply for one of the May Rodriguez Second Chance scholarships. I know it might seem strange for me to apply for a scholarship named after you, given our history, Brittany said. But your story about rebuilding your life after giving so much of yourself to others really resonates with my current situation. The request was both touching and complicated. Brittany was asking me to support her educational goals after years of treating me poorly, but she was also acknowledging that my experience had value and relevance to her own growth process. Brittany, I think it would be wonderful for you to apply for the scholarship. The whole point of the program is to help women rebuild their lives after sacrifice and setback. Your willingness to acknowledge our past difficulties while asking for support shows exactly the kind of personal growth the scholarship is designed to encourage. 6 months later, I was sitting in the Arizona State University auditorium watching Brittany walk across the stage to receive her degree in elementary education. She was 35 years old, a single mother who'd worked part-time while maintaining a full course load, and one of the top graduates in her program. Sophia, now 9 years old, was sitting beside me with Miguel, all of us beaming with pride, as we watched Brittany achieve a goal she'd deferred for over a decade. After the ceremony, Brittany found our small family group and embraced each of us with tears streaming down her face. May, I could never have done this without your support, both financial and personal, Brittany said. The scholarship covered my tuition, but your mentoring and encouragement got me through the difficult moments when I wanted to quit. Miguel was watching our interaction with obvious emotion. Mom, seeing you help Brittany achieve her dreams after everything our family went through shows me what real forgiveness and generosity look like. Sophia, who'd been listening to the adult conversation with the sophisticated understanding that children of divorce often develop, looked up at me with the kind of admiration I'd always hoped to see in my granddaughter's eyes. Abuela Mai, you helped my mommy become a teacher just like you used to be. Yes, mi amor. And now your mommy is going to help lots of other children learn and grow, just like she helped you become such a smart, wonderful little girl. That evening, the four of us went to dinner together to celebrate Brittany's graduation. It was the first time in years that Miguel, Brittany, Sophia, and I had shared a meal as a family unit, and the dynamics were remarkably different from our interactions during the marriage. Without the stress and competition of a romantic relationship, Miguel and Brittany were able to appreciate each other's positive qualities while maintaining healthy boundaries. Both of them treated me with respect and inclusion, making sure I felt valued rather than tolerated. Most importantly, Sophia was witnessing a model of family relationships based on mutual support and celebration, rather than obligation and resentment. She was learning that people could overcome conflicts and help each other grow, that family bonds could be strengthened, rather than weakened by honesty and accountability. Abuela May, Sophia said as we were leaving the restaurant, I want to be a teacher like you and Mommy when I grow up. That's a wonderful goal, sweetheart. Teaching is one of the most important jobs in the world because teachers help people discover what they're capable of achieving. As I drove back to my apartment at Las Flores that night, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that morning, when I'd found the rental sign in my former front yard. The woman who'd once felt discarded and worthless had become someone whose support and guidance were actively sought by people rebuilding their own lives. The scholarship fund continued to grow, now supporting 8 women each semester in their educational pursuits. My work at the college had expanded to include speaking engagements at community organizations and workshops for older adults considering educational opportunities. Most significantly, my family relationships had evolved into something more authentic and sustainable than anything I'd experienced during my marriage to Carlos or the early years of Miguel's family life. Sophia and I had developed a close bond based on mutual affection rather than obligation. Miguel treated me with genuine respect and appreciation rather than dutiful politeness. Even Brittany had become someone I considered a friend rather than just my granddaughter's mother. The house I'd given away had ultimately served its purpose, though not in the way I'd originally intended. Instead of buying me a place in my family's life, it had created a crisis that forced all of us to examine our values and relationship patterns. The pain and conflict that followed had been devastating, but it had also been transformative. I'd learned that my worth wasn't dependent on other people's treatment of me, that real love required mutual respect rather than silent endurance, and that sometimes the most generous thing you could do for people you loved was refuse to enable their bad behavior. Miguel and Brittany had learned that gratitude was an ongoing practice rather than a one-time expression, that family relationships required consistent effort and consideration, and that excluding people who loved them diminished their own lives, rather than protecting their independence. Sophia was growing up understanding that family members supported each other's dreams and celebrated each other's achievements, that conflicts could be resolved through honest communication rather than manipulation or exclusion, and that her Abuela May was someone worth knowing, loving, and learning from. On Sophia's 10th birthday, as I watched her blow out candles on the tres leches cake I'd made in my kitchen at Las Flores, I realized that the family relationships I'd always wanted had finally become reality, not through desperate generosity or silent sacrifice, but through the harder work of demanding respect, offering forgiveness, and building connections based on mutual appreciation rather than obligation. The garage where I'd once been forced to sleep felt like a symbol from another lifetime, a reminder of how low I'd allowed others to value me before I learned to value myself. The woman who'd signed over her house in hopes of securing love and acceptance had discovered that real security came from within, that genuine relationships couldn't be purchased or guaranteed, and that the most important home she could ever own was her own sense of worth. Standing in Miguel's backyard in Scottsdale, surrounded by family members who genuinely valued my presence and appreciated my contributions to their lives, I understood that the real gift hadn't been the house I'd given away years earlier. The real gift had been the crisis that forced all of us to become better people, to build relationships based on honesty rather than performance, and to understand that love was something you practiced rather than something you possessed. May Rodriguez had finally found her way home, not to a building or a place, but to a sense of belonging that no one could ever take away because it came from her own recognition of her worth. And that recognition had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone she'd chosen to love, with wisdom rather than desperation, boundaries rather than boundless sacrifice, and respect rather than silent endurance. The golden years I'd once imagined would be spent in grateful proximity to family members who appreciated my sacrifices had become something better. Years spent actively helping other women discover their own worth, rebuilding relationships on foundations of mutual respect, and understanding that the most valuable thing anyone could give or receive was the recognition that every person deserved to be treated with dignity, regardless of how much they'd given or received from others. In the end, the house had been just a house. But the woman who'd given it away had become someone worth knowing, someone whose story mattered, someone whose voice could change lives, and whose example could inspire others to demand better for themselves. And that transformation, more than any property or possession, was the true inheritance I would leave for Sophia, and for all the women whose second chances I'd been privileged to support. The knowledge that it's never too late to discover your worth, to demand respect, to rebuild your life on a foundation of dignity rather than desperation. May Rodriguez had come home to herself, and from that secure foundation, she'd been able to help others find their way home too. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.